I never thought a parking spot could ruin my life. But here I was, staring at a $400 fine from the Pleasant Ridge Homeowners Association for negligent property damage and aesthetic violations. My name is Harrison Jennings, and I had been living in my modest 3-bedroom ranch house in Pleasant Ridge, Arizona, for exactly 8 months when this nightmare began. The whole situation started on a cold February morning when I found the certified letter wedged into my mailbox. I ripped it open while standing on my driveway, my breath forming small clouds in the crisp desert air. The letter was printed on expensive cream-colored paper with the HOA's embossed logo at the top, and the words seemed to jump off the page and slap me across the face. According to the letter, my concrete driveway had developed severe salt staining that was visible from the street and violated Section 12.4 of the Community Guidelines regarding property maintenance and curb appeal. The fine was immediate, and I had 14 days to professionally clean and reseal the concrete or face additional penalties of $100 per day. At the bottom, in sharp blue ink, was the signature of Karen Olson, HOA board president. I looked down at my driveway. Sure enough, there were white crusty patches scattered across the concrete near where I parked my truck. They looked like someone had spilled salt water and let it evaporate, leaving behind mineral deposits. The thing was, I had never used salt on my driveway. Phoenix doesn't get snow. We barely get frost. Why would I have salt anywhere near my property? I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Derek Martinez, who worked as an industrial chemist for a pharmaceutical company in Tempe. We had met in college and stayed close over the years. If anyone could figure out what these stains actually were, it was him. "Hey Harrison, what's up?" Derek answered on the third ring. "I need your brain, man. The HOA is fining me for salt stains on my driveway, but I've never used salt. Can you come take a look? Salt stains. In Phoenix." Derek laughed. "That's bizarre. Yeah, I can swing by after work. Around 6 OK. I spent the rest of the day fuming. I tried to work from my home office, but I kept staring out the window at those damn white patches. Around noon, I decided to walk the neighborhood to see if anyone else had similar stains. The development consisted of about 60 homes, all built in the same southwestern style with stucco walls and tile roofs. Most driveways looked pristine. As I walked down Saguaro Lane, I noticed Karen Olson working in her front yard. She was exactly what you would expect from an HOA president who sent certified letters with $400 fines. Mid-40s, blonde hair cut in a severe bob, wearing khaki capris and a polo shirt with the Pleasant Ridge logo embroidered on it. She was trimming her hedge with the kind of precision that suggested she measured each branch with a ruler. "Mrs. Olson," I called out, trying to keep my voice pleasant. She turned, and her expression shifted from concentration to something that looked like satisfaction. "Mr. Jennings, I assume you received the violation notice." "I did. That's actually what I wanted to talk about. I've never used salt on my driveway. Are you sure these stains are actually from salt?" Karen set down her hedge trimmers and crossed her arms. "Mr. Jennings, the board has been managing this community for 12 years. We know salt staining when we see it. Perhaps you're not aware of what products you're using, but the damage is clearly visible and it's bringing down property values. But it doesn't make sense. Phoenix doesn't get ice. Why would I have salt? That's not the board's concern. The guidelines are clear. The driveway must be maintained in pristine condition. You have 14 days. She picked up her trimmers and turned back to her hedge, dismissing me. I walked back home, my frustration building with each step. When I got inside, I pulled out my copy of the HOA guidelines, all 63 pages of them. Section 12.4 did indeed require driveways to be free of stains, cracks, or discoloration that negatively impacts the aesthetic quality of the community. But it seemed insane that they could just declare something a violation without any investigation. Derek showed up at 6:15, pulling into my driveway in his sensible Honda sedan. He was a lanky guy with black hair and glasses that were perpetually sliding down his nose. He climbed out holding a small plastic case. "All right, let's see these mysterious salt stains," he said, grinning. I led him to the worst patches. Derek knelt down, pushing his glasses up, and examined the white crusty deposits. He pulled out a small kit from his case and began scraping samples into glass vials. "So you've seriously never used any ice melt or rock salt here?" he asked. "Never. I don't even own any." Derek nodded, labeling the vials carefully. "These definitely look like salt deposits, but you're right that it's weird. Let me run these through the lab. I can do some basic analysis tomorrow. Won't you get in trouble using the company lab for personal stuff?" "Nah, I've got some discretionary testing time. Besides, now I'm curious." He stood up, brushing off his knees. "I'll call you tomorrow afternoon when I have results." That night, I barely slept. $400 wasn't going to bankrupt me, but it was the principle. I hadn't done anything wrong, and yet I was being punished. I kept running through scenarios in my head. Could someone have vandalized my driveway? But who would waste salt on that? And why just my house? The next morning, I was on my second cup of coffee when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in his 60s wearing a Pleasant Ridge maintenance uniform. He was holding a clipboard and looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Jennings, I'm Tom from Community Maintenance. The board sent me to assess your driveway damage. Come on in. Well, come around." I led him to the driveway. Tom knelt down exactly where Derek had knelt the night before. He scratched at the deposits with his fingernail, then pulled out his phone and took several photos. "Have you seen stains like this before?" I asked. Tom glanced at me, then back at the stains. "To be honest, not really. Most driveways around here get oil stains or tire marks. This is different." "Different how?" He hesitated. "Look, I shouldn't say anything, but this seems excessive. Mrs. Olson has been pushing hard on violations lately. 3 other homeowners got cited this month alone." "For what?" One guy's mailbox was 2 inches off regulation height. Another had the wrong shade of white on their trim. The third had weeds in their rock garden. Tom stood up and lowered his voice. "Between you and me, people are getting fed up. There's talk of trying to vote her off the board." "How would that work?" "Annual meeting is in April. You need a 2/3 vote to remove a board member, but she's got allies and she's good at intimidating people." Tom finished his assessment and left. I spent the rest of the morning researching HOA law in Arizona. It turned out that while HOAs had broad authority, they also had to follow due process. Fines were supposed to come with the opportunity for a hearing. The letter I had received made no mention of any hearing rights. Derek called at 2:30. "Okay, so I've got interesting news. Those aren't just salt stains." "What do you mean?" "I mean, yes, there's sodium chloride, regular table salt. But there's also calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, and traces of potassium acetate. You know what has that exact mixture?" "No idea." "Commercial ice melt. The kind municipalities use on roads. But here's where it gets really interesting. I found something else in the samples. There's a specific polymer in there, a proprietary anti-caking agent that's only used by one manufacturer, Arctic Shield. They supply ice melt to municipal contracts all over the Southwest." My brain started spinning. So this is professional-grade ice melt, not something a homeowner would buy. Exactly, and it gets better. That anti-caking agent. They only added it to their formula in the last 2 years, and they only sell to commercial customers. Cities, counties, large businesses. You can't buy this stuff at Home Depot. Can you put all this in writing, like an official analysis, already done? I'm emailing you the full report right now. I included the chemical breakdown, the manufacturer information, everything. I thanked Derek profusely and opened my laptop. The email came through within seconds. The report was thorough, full of chemical formulas and spectroscopy graphs that I barely understood, but the conclusion was crystal clear. The substance on my driveway was commercial-grade ice melt that I could not have possibly applied myself. The question now was how it got there. I walked outside and looked at my driveway with new eyes. The stains were concentrated in specific areas, not spread evenly. They formed rough lines and patches, almost like someone had walked or driven through salt and then tracked it onto my driveway. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures from every angle. Then I walked up and down my street, looking at other driveways. Most were clean, but as I got closer to the main entrance of the neighborhood, I noticed something. The street itself had white residue along the edges, particularly near the storm drains. The main entrance had a guard gate, unmanned but with cameras. The streets in Pleasant Ridge were private property maintained by the HOA. I walked to the entrance and examined the ground. Sure enough, there were heavy concentrations of white crusty deposits all around the entrance area, especially in the gutters and low spots where water would pool. My phone rang. It was my neighbor, a retired teacher named Patricia Gomez who lived 3 houses down. "Harrison, I heard you got hit with a fine," she said without preamble. News travels fast. "This is a small neighborhood, honey. Listen, you should know that you're not the only one. My son Miguel got fined last week for the same thing. Salt stains on his driveway. He lives on Palo Verde Circle." "Did he use salt?" "Of course not. We've lived here 15 years. Never needed salt once. Patricia, I have a chemist friend who analyzed my stains. They're from commercial ice melt, the kind cities use. I think the HOA might have applied it themselves." There was a long pause. "Why would they do that?" "I don't know yet. Can you give me Miguel's number? I want to compare notes." She gave me the information, and I called Miguel immediately. He was a software engineer who worked from home, around my age, and he was angry. "This whole thing is garbage," Miguel said when I explained what Derek had found. "I got fined $300. The letter said I had to pay a professional company to clean it, and the only approved company charges $800. Wait, they have an approved company list." "Yeah, it's in the fine print of the violation notice. You have to use an HOA-approved vendor or they won't sign off that the work is complete." I pulled out my letter again. Sure enough, at the bottom in small text, it listed 3 approved concrete cleaning companies. I Googled the first one. Their website was basic, and their business address was a UPS store mailbox in Scottsdale. The second company had no website at all. The third had a Facebook page that hadn't been updated in 8 months. "Miguel, these companies look fake. You think the HOA is running a scam?" "I don't know, but something's not right. Listen, do you have time to meet? Maybe we can get other homeowners together who have been fined." We agreed to meet that evening at a coffee shop just outside the neighborhood. I spent the next few hours calling the numbers listed for the cleaning companies. The first 2 went straight to voicemail with generic messages. The third was answered by a woman who sounded like she was in a call center. "Desert Clean Concrete, how can I help you?" "Hi, I need to schedule a driveway cleaning. I'm in Pleasant Ridge." "Oh, Pleasant Ridge. Yes, we do a lot of work there. The rate is $800 for standard driveway cleaning and sealing." "That seems expensive. What does it include?" pressure washing, chemical treatment, and sealant application. Our next available appointment is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I only have 14 days to get this done. Well, we might be able to fit you in sooner for a rush fee. That would be an additional $200. I hung up. This was absolutely a scam. I called Derek again and explained what I had found. So they're applying ice melt to driveways, fining people, and then forcing them to use expensive cleaning companies that probably kick back money to the board, Derek summarized. That's fraud, Harrison, like actual criminal fraud. I know, but I need proof. Right now, all I have is suspicious circumstances and your chemical analysis. What if we could prove the HOA bought the ice melt? How? Municipal purchases are usually public record. If the HOA bought commercial ice melt, there should be invoices or purchase orders. You're in Arizona, right? You have pretty strong public records laws. I spent that evening at the coffee shop with Miguel and Patricia. We spread out our violation notices on a corner table and compared them. All 3 of us had received fines within a 2-week period. All 3 violations were for salt staining. And all 3 letters directed us to the same list of approved vendors. My neighbor Bill got fined last month, Patricia said. He paid the $800 to get it cleaned because he was afraid they'd put a lien on his house. But 2 weeks after the cleaning, the stains came back. Did he complain to the board? I asked. He tried. Mrs. Olson told him it was his responsibility to maintain the cleaning, and if he got fined again, it would be for a repeat violation with higher penalties. Miguel shook his head in disgust. This is extortion. We need to report this to someone. The police won't care about HOA disputes, Patricia said. We need a lawyer. Lawyers are expensive, I countered. Let me try something first. Derek thinks we can get records of HOA purchases. If I can prove they bought commercial ice melt and then applied it to our driveways, we have a clear case. Over the next 3 days, I became an amateur investigator. I filed a public records request with the City of Phoenix for any purchase orders or contracts involving the Pleasant Ridge HOA. I also started documenting everything. I photographed the white residue at the neighborhood entrance, along the streets, and on my driveway. I created a spreadsheet tracking all the homeowners who had been fined. The list was longer than I expected. In the past 6 months, 17 homeowners had received violation notices. 8 were for salt staining. The others were for various minor infractions like the ones Tom had mentioned. The total fines assessed came to over $8,000. I also discovered something interesting when I pulled up the HOA's annual budget, which was available to all homeowners through the management company's website. 6 months ago, there was a line item for $10,000 paid to a company called Summit Property Solutions. I Googled the name. Summit Property Solutions was a property management consulting firm based in Tucson. Their website was full of corporate speak about maximizing asset value and optimizing revenue streams. I called the number listed on their website. A cheerful receptionist answered. Summit Property Solutions, how may I direct your call? Hi, I'm a board member for a homeowners association, and I'm interested in your consulting services. Wonderful. Let me connect you with one of our client specialists. A moment later, a man with a smooth sales voice came on the line. This is Brad Hutchinson. How can Summit help your community thrive? I'm exploring ways to increase our HOA's revenue without raising dues. I heard you work with associations on that. Absolutely. That's our specialty. We help boards identify underutilized enforcement opportunities and streamline their violation processes. Many of our clients see a 30 to 50% increase in annual revenue through our comprehensive compliance programs. My stomach turned. What exactly does that involve? Well, we start with a detailed audit of your community guidelines. Most HOAs have dozens of rules that aren't being actively enforced. We help you implement systematic inspections and consistent citation procedures. We also connect you with preferred vendors who provide competitive pricing and revenue sharing arrangements. Revenue sharing? Yes, for services like landscaping violations, property repairs, that sort of thing. Our vendor partners understand that consistent referrals are valuable, so they're willing to structure deals that benefit everyone. The homeowner gets quality work, the vendor gets steady business, and the HOA receives a consulting fee. I felt sick. That sounds perfect. Can you send me some information? Of course. Can I get your name and association? I gave him a fake name and made up an HOA, then hung up. This was it. The HOA had hired Summit Property Solutions to create a system for generating revenue through violations and kickbacks. Karen Olson wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was running an organized scheme, but I still needed hard evidence. The chemical analysis from Derek proved the ice melt was commercial grade, but it didn't prove the HOA had applied it. I needed to catch them in the act. I called Miguel. How would you feel about setting up some security cameras? What are you thinking? If the HOA is applying ice melt to create violations, they have to be doing it somehow. Maybe they're doing it at night or early in the morning. If we can get video evidence, we've got them. Miguel was on board immediately. He ordered several wireless security cameras with night vision, and we spent a Saturday installing them. I put 2 cameras covering my driveway, hidden in the eaves of my garage. Miguel did the same at his house. Patricia agreed to install one covering the street in front of her house. We also recruited 2 other homeowners who had been fined. James Paulson was a firefighter who worked 24-hour shifts, and his wife Rachel was a nurse. They were both furious about a $300 fine for excessive front yard lighting from a solar lamp they had installed. The other recruit was David Wu, a professor at Arizona State University who had been cited for having the wrong type of mailbox numbers. With 6 households now documenting everything, we settled in to wait. I set up the camera system to record continuously and alert my phone if it detected motion in the driveway between midnight and 6 in the morning. On the 3rd night, my phone buzzed at 3:45. I grabbed it off my nightstand and opened the camera app. The night vision footage was grainy and green-tinged, but I could clearly see a white pickup truck with a Pleasant Ridge maintenance logo on the door parked at the end of my driveway. A figure climbed out, walked to my driveway, and began spreading something from a bucket. My heart hammered in my chest. I was watching someone actively sabotaging my property. I wanted to run outside and confront them, but I forced myself to stay calm. Video evidence was better than a confrontation in the dark. The figure worked for about 5 minutes, spreading the substance in a random pattern across my concrete. Then they climbed back in the truck and drove away. I immediately called Miguel. "Did your camera catch anything?" "Yeah, a maintenance truck just left." "You?" "Same. They hit my place first, then drove to you." We stayed on the phone and watched as the truck methodically visited 4 more houses, including Patricia's. At each stop, someone got out and spread something on the driveway. The whole operation took less than 30 minutes. As soon as it was light enough, I went outside. Fresh white crusty patches covered sections of my driveway that had been cleaned the day before. I photographed everything, careful to include timestamps. Miguel came over at 7. "We've got them, Harrison. This is clear evidence of vandalism and fraud. We need to download all the footage and make backup copies. Then I think it's time to call the police. But first, I wanted to try one more thing." I sent an email to every homeowner in Pleasant Ridge using the community directory list. The subject line was simple: HOA violation scam evidence. In the email, I explained everything we had discovered. I attached Derek's chemical analysis, photos of the ice melt residue at the neighborhood entrance, screenshots of Summit Property Solutions website advertising revenue sharing, and still frames from the security footage showing the maintenance truck spreading substances on driveways in the middle of the night. I hit send at 8:30 on a Monday morning and waited. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. Homeowners were furious. Many had paid fines without questioning them, assuming they had somehow caused the damage. Others had been intimidated into compliance by threats of liens and legal action. One retired couple, the Hendersons, had paid nearly $2,000 over the past year for various violations that they now realized were likely fabricated. At 3 in the afternoon, I received an email from Karen Olson. The subject line was defamation and harassment. Mr. Jennings, your baseless accusations and harassment of the board are completely unacceptable. The allegations you have spread through the community are defamatory and false. The board enforces violations in accordance with our governing documents, which all homeowners agreed to upon purchasing their properties. Your refusal to accept responsibility for your property maintenance and your attempts to avoid legitimate fines will result in additional penalties. You are hereby fined an additional $500 for harassment of board members and spreading false information damaging to the community. A hearing regarding your continued residency in Pleasant Ridge will be scheduled for next week. Karen Olson, Board President, Pleasant Ridge HOA. I read the email twice, barely believing the audacity. They were doubling down. I forwarded the email to everyone on the community list, then called the Phoenix Police non-emergency number. The dispatcher was polite but skeptical. Sir, HOA disputes are civil matters. We don't typically get involved unless there's been a direct threat or violence. This isn't a dispute. This is criminal fraud and vandalism. I have video evidence of HOA maintenance staff deliberately damaging property in order to issue fines. Video evidence? Yes, from multiple security cameras. They're spreading commercial ice melt on driveways at night to create fake violations. There was a pause. That's unusual. Let me transfer you to someone who can take a report. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with Officer Daniel Martinez, explaining the entire situation. He listened carefully and asked detailed questions about the timeline, the number of victims, and the total amount of money involved. Mr. Jennings, if what you're describing is accurate, this is potentially wire fraud, since they're using postal mail to send the violation notices, and possibly racketeering if there's an organized scheme with the vendor kickbacks. That's actually federal territory. So what should I do? I'm going to take your report and open a case. Can you email me all the evidence you mentioned? Photos, the chemical analysis, the security footage, all of it. I'll also need contact information for the other affected homeowners. Absolutely. Thank you. I spent the rest of the evening compiling everything into an organized digital folder. Derek's chemical analysis, time-stamped photos, security footage from all 6 cameras, the suspicious vendor information, the Summit Property Solutions details, copies of all the violation notices, and the spreadsheet tracking fines. It was a substantial package of evidence. That night, I finally slept well for the first time in 2 weeks. The next morning, I woke to find 17 emails from other Pleasant Ridge homeowners offering support and sharing their own stories of suspicious violations. A woman named Lisa Chen told me she had been fined for having dead plants in her yard, but the plants in question were native desert species that were supposed to look that way. A man named Robert Foster had been cited for a cracked driveway, but when he had it inspected, the inspector found no cracks at all. The pattern was clear. The board, led by Karen Olson, had been manufacturing violations for months to generate revenue. At 10 in the morning, I received a call from Officer Martinez. "Mr. Jennings, I reviewed your evidence with my sergeant and our fraud unit. This is definitely worth investigating. We're going to send a detective to interview you and some of the other homeowners. Are you available this afternoon?" "Absolutely." Detective Sarah Chen arrived at 2. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s with a no-nonsense demeanor. She set up a digital recorder on my kitchen table and spent 2 hours going through everything with me. She asked about the timeline, the specific language in the violation notices, the approved vendor list, and particularly about Summit Property Solutions. "The vendor kickback angle is interesting," she said, making notes. "If we can prove the board members are receiving payments from these cleaning companies, that's bribery. Combined with the deliberate property damage, we're looking at serious charges. What happens next?" "I'm going to interview the other homeowners you mentioned, and I'm going to request financial records from the HOA. In Arizona, HOA financial records are accessible to homeowners. Have you requested those?" "Not formally. I only looked at what was publicly posted on the management company's website. Request everything. Bank statements, check registers, vendor contracts, all of it. You have a legal right to see those records. If they refuse, that's another problem for them." Detective Chen left, and I immediately drafted a formal records request to the HOA management company, Sterling Property Management. I requested 5 years of financial records, all vendor contracts, bank statements, and any correspondence with Summit Property Solutions. I sent it via certified mail and email. The response came faster than I expected. The next morning, I received a call from a nervous-sounding man who identified himself as Peter Walsh, the account manager at Sterling Property Management. "Mr. Jennings, I got your records request. I need to tell you something confidentially." "Okay. I've been uncomfortable with some of the board's activities for a while now. When Mrs. Olson hired Summit Property Solutions 6 months ago, they started pushing me to process way more violation fines. I raised concerns with Mrs. Olson, and she told me it was none of my business how the board chose to enforce the rules. You have records of the payments to Summit?" "Yes, and more. I have emails from Mrs. Olson directing me to pay specific vendors without competitive bidding. I have records of cash payments made to board members categorized as consulting fees, and I have an invoice from a company called Desert Ice Services for 500 pounds of commercial ice melt purchased in January." My pulse quickened. January. Right before the salt staining violations started appearing. "Exactly. Mr. Jennings, I'm going to cooperate fully with whatever investigation is happening. I'll provide all the records you requested, and I'm going to reach out to the police myself. I don't want any part of this fraud." "Thank you, Peter. That takes courage. I've been doing property management for 15 years. This is the first time I've seen a board cross the line into actual crime. Mrs. Olson is out of control." The records arrived 2 days later in a massive digital file. I spent hours going through bank statements and invoices. The picture that emerged was damning. Over the past 6 months, Pleasant Ridge HOA had paid Summit Property Solutions $12,000 in consulting fees. Desert Ice Services had indeed sold them 500 pounds of ice melt in January. The 3 approved concrete cleaning vendors had each received multiple payments, and in several cases, there were corresponding payments out to board members labeled as administrative reimbursements. I compiled everything into an organized report and sent it to Detective Chen. While I waited for the investigation to progress, the community was in upheaval. Karen Olson sent an email announcing an emergency board meeting to address the false accusations being spread about the board's activities. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. Miguel and I arrived early. The small clubhouse was packed with angry homeowners. Patricia was there, along with James and Rachel Paulson, David Wu, Lisa Chen, Robert Foster, and at least 40 others. The energy in the room was tense and hostile. Karen Olson sat at a folding table at the front with two other board members, Richard Tate and Maureen Sullivan. Karen looked composed, her blonde bob perfectly styled, but I could see tension in her shoulders. She called the meeting to order by rapping a gavel on the table. This emergency meeting is called to address the defamatory allegations being spread by Mr. Harrison Jennings and others. The board takes these accusations very seriously, as you take fraud. Someone shouted from the back. Several people laughed. Karen's face tightened. Mr. Jennings has accused the board of fabricating violations and engaging in improper financial dealings. These accusations are completely false. The board has always acted in the best interests of the community. I stood up. Mrs. Olson, I have security camera footage of Pleasant Ridge maintenance staff spreading ice melt on my driveway at 3:45 in the morning. That footage has been provided to the Phoenix Police Fraud Unit. Would you like to explain that? The room erupted in noise. People were shouting questions at the board. Karen tried to regain control with the gavel, but it was useless. The maintenance staff performs various property maintenance tasks, Karen said, her voice rising. Any chemicals used are for legitimate purposes. Like what? Miguel called out. It's Phoenix. We don't need ice melt. Calcium chloride can be used for dust control, Karen said quickly. Derek, who had come to the meeting for moral support, stood up. I'm a chemist. Calcium chloride is not used for dust control in residential areas. The concentration found on Mr. Jennings' driveway is consistent with commercial ice melt application. Nothing else. Richard Tate, one of the other board members, cleared his throat. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Karen, maybe we should table this discussion until we can consult with the association's attorney. We don't need an attorney. We haven't done anything wrong. Then explain Summit Property Solutions, I said, pulling out printed copies of the invoices. I walked to the front and placed them on the table. Explain why the HOA paid them $12,000 for consultation on maximizing violation revenue. Explain the vendor kickback arrangements. Karen's face flushed red. Those are private business matters. They're not private. HOA finances are available to all homeowners. And speaking of finances, explain the 500-pound ice melt purchase from Desert Ice Services in January, right before all the salt staining violations started appearing. The room went completely silent. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she looked rattled. Maureen Sullivan, the third board member, put her hand on Karen's arm. Karen, I think we need to adjourn this meeting and seek legal counsel. I agree, Richard said quickly. Karen jerked her arm away from Maureen. Fine, this meeting is adjourned. All violations stand as issued. Anyone who refuses to pay will face liens and legal action. Good luck with that, Patricia called out. The police are investigating you. As people filed out of the clubhouse, I saw Karen having a heated, whispered conversation with Richard and Maureen. Both of them looked frightened. Karen just looked angry. Over the next week, things moved quickly. Detective Chen executed a search warrant on the HOA's maintenance shed and found 3 more 50-pound bags of commercial ice melt. She also obtained bank records showing that the 3 approved cleaning vendors were shell companies all registered to the same address, a mailbox in Scottsdale. The owner of that mailbox was Karen Olson's brother-in-law. The scheme was simple but effective. Karen had hired Summit Property Solutions to create a system for generating violation revenue. She had manufactured violations by damaging property with ice melt or simply citing people for non-existent problems. Homeowners were forced to use approved vendors that were actually shell companies funneling money back to Karen and her family. The other board members had either been complicit or too intimidated to speak up. Detective Chen interviewed Richard Tate and Maureen Sullivan separately. According to what Peter Walsh later told me, Maureen claimed she had no knowledge of the fraud and had trusted Karen to handle the board's business. Richard admitted he had known something was wrong, but was afraid to challenge Karen because she had threatened to sue him personally for interfering with board operations. The district attorney's office got involved. In early March, Karen Olson was arrested at her home and charged with fraud, wire fraud, theft, criminal damage to property, and racketeering. Her brother-in-law, Thomas Hendrickson, was also arrested for his role in the shell company scheme. The total amount of money they had fraudulently extracted from Pleasant Ridge homeowners was estimated at over $40,000. The arrest made the local news. I watched the segment on Channel 3 showing Karen being walked out of her house in handcuffs, her perfect bob slightly messed up, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. The reporter mentioned that 2 other board members were cooperating with the investigation. The Homeowners Association had to be completely restructured. Sterling Property Management terminated their contract with Pleasant Ridge, and Peter Walsh testified as a witness for the prosecution. The remaining homeowners held an emergency election and installed a new board. Patricia Gomez became the new president. One of her first acts was to void all the fraudulent violations and authorize refunds to everyone who had paid fines. I got my $400 back, plus an additional $300 I had spent on security cameras and Derek's initial lab work. Miguel got his $300. The Hendersons got their $2,000. In total, the association refunded over $30,000 to homeowners, but the legal process was far from over. Karen Olson hired an expensive criminal defense attorney who tried to argue that she had simply been overzealous in enforcing the community rules, and that any financial benefit was unintentional. The prosecutor wasn't buying it. They had emails showing Karen had specifically sought out Summit Property Solutions after reading about HOA's increasing revenue through aggressive violation enforcement. They had bank records showing systematic transfers from the shell companies to accounts controlled by Karen and her brother-in-law. In May, I was called to testify before a grand jury. I walked them through the entire timeline, from receiving the initial violation notice to discovering the ice melt scheme to capturing the maintenance staff on video. Derek also testified about his chemical analysis. Peter Walsh provided detailed testimony about the financial arrangements and Karen's directives to process violations without proper investigation. The grand jury indicted Karen on 12 felony counts. Thomas Hendrickson was indicted on 8 counts. Summit Property Solutions was also charged as a corporate entity for conspiracy to commit fraud. The criminal trial was scheduled for September, but in August, Karen's attorney worked out a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 6 counts of fraud and 1 count of theft. In exchange for the plea, the other charges were dropped, and she agreed to cooperate against Summit Property Solutions. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all affected homeowners. Thomas Hendrickson pleaded guilty to similar charges and got 3 years. The civil lawsuits came next. Several homeowners, including the Hendersons who had paid the most money, filed suit against Karen personally, Summit Property Solutions, and the previous HOA board for damages. I joined as a plaintiff in a class action. Our attorney argued that the fraud had caused not just direct financial harm, but also emotional distress and potential damage to property values from the negative publicity. The cases were settled out of court in early 2027. Summit Property Solutions agreed to pay a substantial settlement and went out of business. Karen's homeowner's insurance covered part of her personal liability, though she was still on the hook for a significant amount. Most of us received checks that more than covered our losses. But more satisfying than the money was the change in how Pleasant Ridge operated. The new board under Patricia's leadership took a completely different approach. They focused on actual community improvements rather than nitpicky enforcement. Violation notices were rare and only issued for legitimate safety or significant aesthetic concerns. Fines were reasonable and only applied after homeowners were given opportunities to correct issues. The neighborhood became a genuinely pleasant place to live, which seemed fitting given the name. Derek became something of a local hero. When word spread about how his chemical analysis had been the key to unraveling the fraud, he got interviewed by a couple of newspapers. He took it in stride, joking that it was the most exciting thing his chemistry knowledge had ever been used for outside of work. One Saturday afternoon in October, long after the legal dust had settled, Derek came over and we sat on my driveway with beers, looking at the concrete. The salt stains had been properly cleaned off months ago, and the surface looked better than it had when I first moved in. "You know what's funny?" Derek said. "If Karen had just left well enough alone, she probably could have stayed on as HOA president for years. She wasn't terrible at the administrative stuff, but she got greedy. And she underestimated how much people hate being scammed," I added. "Nobody wants to pay $400 for fake violations." "True. Hey, how's the new board working out?" "Great, actually. Patricia runs a tight ship, but she's fair. Last month they repaved the neighborhood streets and fixed the entrance gate instead of spending money on harassment campaigns. Revolutionary concept." Derek laughed. "Who knew an HOA could actually improve a neighborhood?" We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Derek asked, "Do you ever think about moving somewhere without an HOA?" "Honestly, after all this, no. Because now I know what to watch out for. And I know that homeowners can stand up for themselves when someone abuses power." This whole experience was terrible, but it was also kind of empowering. "That's surprisingly optimistic of you." "Well, we won. Karen's in prison, we got our money back, and Pleasant Ridge is actually pleasant now. I'll take that victory." My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. The new board was organizing a community barbecue for the following weekend, and she wanted to know if I could help with setup. I texted back that I would be there. As Derek and I finished our beers and watched the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I felt genuinely content. My driveway was clean, my neighborhood was functional, and justice had been served. Sometimes the system actually works, especially when people are willing to stand up and fight back armed with evidence and determination. Karen Olson had learned that lesson the hard way, and I had learned that even small acts of resistance matter. One security camera, one chemical analysis, one homeowner refusing to accept an unjust fine had unraveled an entire criminal operation. The concrete beneath us was pristine, free of the salt stains that had started this whole mess. Looking at it now, it was hard to believe that those white crusty patches had led to fraud investigations, criminal trials, and the complete restructuring of our homeowners association. But they had, and our community was better for it. I raised my beer bottle toward Derek. "Thanks for being a chemist." He clinked his bottle against mine. "Thanks for being stubborn enough not to just pay the fine." We both laughed, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear kids playing in one of the neighborhood parks. The sound was peaceful, normal, exactly what a suburban evening should be. Pleasant Ridge had lived through a storm and come out stronger on the other side. Karen Olson had tried to turn our community into her personal revenue stream, but she had forgotten something fundamental. Communities are made up of people who care about their homes and their neighbors. When you try to exploit that, eventually someone will notice, someone will investigate, and someone will fight back. In this case, that someone was me, with help from a chemist friend, supportive neighbors, and a justice system that actually worked when presented with clear evidence. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when I doubted whether it was worth the effort. But standing there on my clean driveway on a beautiful Arizona evening, I knew it absolutely had been. The HOA that had tried to fine me for damage they themselves had caused was gone, replaced by leadership that actually served the community. The fraudster who had orchestrated the scheme was behind bars, and I had learned valuable lessons about documentation, persistence, and the power of standing up for what's right. My house in Pleasant Ridge, Arizona, was truly my home now, in a neighborhood that functioned the way it was supposed to. The salt stains were gone, the corrupt board was gone, and life was good. Sometimes, despite all the cynicism in the world, the good guys really do win. And it all started with $400, some white crusty patches on concrete, and the willingness to ask a simple question. Why would there be salt stains in Phoenix?